Hi, today I'd like to talk to you about the composite component. The composite component is a component that can hold other components. The idea behind it is if you have common combinations of components, say you had like a three-column component and you had different promos in each of them and you wanted to kind of use that as a whole on multiple pages, you leverage a composite component so you only have to have that configuration once and then you can go add it in wherever you want. You'll find this is not something uncommon. There's different variations of this type of component in blog posts and in several frameworks. They're sometimes referred to as snippets. But I've actually taken this concept and extended a little bit, as we'll see in a little bit. So first, just the basic ones. So here's the actual composite component, and you can see I actually have an H4 component and a content component. But if I wanted, I could put images. I could put additional components and they all be stored in this container. Um, the other thing I can do is I can apply personalization and A/B testing into this component, and they're all honored. Then when I go into a particular page or anywhere where I want to use it, I can basically edit whole, and you can see it's not editable here because it's only editable um, on the component page, and you can actually click through to get to it. So this is kind of a useful way to kind of leverage groupings and be efficient with it. But I've actually taken this a step further because I had the idea that this was a perfect place to implement a feature that enables you to drive the content in these composite components asynchronously. And you can think there are really two main use cases and kind of why I built this. One is imagine you have a long running component, a component that has significant resources. It takes some time to load. You may not want to wait on the page for it. So one of the things you can do is you can put in a composite component. You can configure a composite component to be asynchronous. I'll show you how to do that in a second. And then the page will load with just a blank container, and then we'll just load that on the client side. The other really cool way you can leverage this is for donut hole caching. So imagine your site is behind a CDN and you're not actually getting the page to hit Sitecore in every request. But you'd still like to load some personalized content. And for that, you can kind of load the initial page from your CDN and then maybe load the content in whatever composite component you want from a raw URL that points to your Sitecore server. So I'll show you how I've extended the standard composite component approach to kind of support that. And you can actually see on this component, I can actually go to component properties, and there are these three settings: enable async, load content async only. So when you don't check this, it'll actually render it server side all the time. But when you do check this, the container div will always be empty, and you won't have any content until it shows up. So the reason you want to do that, the reason you wouldn't want to do that is if you want to avoid a flicker, if it's because the page will load and then it'll fill. So you may have some CSS things to think through for that. And the last field is a base URL, because by default it'll kind of point to the item URL to where your composite component lies. But if you're behind a CDN, you'd want to change that. So maybe your CDN URL would be your main URL, and here would be your non-synced URL. So that opens up some possibilities to do that. So, I mean, and that's pretty much it. So just to kind of show you, so I can refresh, it's going to be hard to see. It's probably going so quick you're not really seeing it, but if I view page source, well, first off, let me inspect and show you on the console. I got some other stuff I got to deal with, but you can see there's this fetching data from this path to our composite component, right? So it actually is doing it. And if I view page source, and we search for composite async, you can actually see that this is just a div with nothing in it. and it goes right to the mobile component. So just looking back at this, you can see it goes, it basically skips over this. So this content is not actually rendered. So that's just a cool thing. I mean, the composite component by itself is actually a pretty cool tool to use just to kind of group components. But by making it async, it opens up a whole other suite of possibilities for improving page load performance and also even getting around a CDN with some donut hole caching for personalization purposes. All right, that's it. Thanks, guys.